Hey, we're
Okay.
here. Hey, Jason.
Hey, Gary.
This week, people are reading what book? What book are you reading
Oh,
this week?
let's see. I'm so confused. We're reading Deuteronomy this week.
Deuteronomy.
Deuteronomy.
Okay.
And what book was I supposed to send sermon outline over this week?
That's a whole different story.
I didn't send the right one. So I'm a week ahead, but I'm a week behind.
That's a good place to be.
Yeah. Once I finish the one that I'm supposed to do, then I'll be 2 weeks ahead. But right now, I'm the wrong week ahead.
And so if Deuteronomy is this week, last week would have been?
Numbers.
Numbers. How important is the book of Numbers?
Oh, Gary, it is so important. It is so important. You didn't know this, but there's going to be a test.
There'll be a test.
There will be a final exam.
So as a math teacher, you think numbers is important?
Numbers is perhaps the most important. So I think this is the way it may actually play out.
Is that a cartoon or an actual photograph?
This is an artist rendition.
Okay.
So yeah, the math phobic's nightmare. So the gatekeeper there, the train leaves Philadelphia at 1 o'clock.
Okay. It's going 65
traveling
miles
65
an hour.
miles an hour. Another train leaves Denver. Say, do you need a piece of paper? You might have to show your work.
That's how you get in. So that is how important the book of Numbers is. If you skip the book of Numbers, go back and do the book of Numbers.
The numbers matter.
Numbers. What did we do last week?
Last week we finished Ezekiel. We did the numbers in Ezekiel last week.
So tonight, we did a bunch of numbers in Ezekiel last week, didn't we?
Yeah.
So tonight we're doing
Daniel.
Oh, good. Do we get to do Daniel the Lion's Den?
Not yet.
Oh, man.
Jumping the gun. I better make sure you get to do that chapter.
I probably won't. Is it an odd or an even chapter?
I don't even remember. I haven't looked that far ahead yet.
I haven't either. As we get ready to go into Daniel, we need to review some of the things we talked about when we started Ezekiel, some of the nations that were involved in world affairs then. Two of the main ones were Assyria and Babylon that had an impact especially on the land of Canaan. They're both in the general area of what we call Mesopotamia, which means between the rivers. Meso means rivers, and means in the middle of, and Potamia means rivers. You know what a hippopotamus is?
It's a water horse.
That's right, because hippo is the word for horse, and potamo is the name for river, so he's a river horse. Good job. You like etymology?
I like tacos better.
Okay. Because we have another etymology test coming on a little bit later, so I'll ask you again if you like that.
Okay.
There had been earlier Assyrian and Babylonian kingdoms, but the time period we're talking about was a Neo-Assyrian and a Neo-Babylonian.
That means
empire.
new.
It does. It means new.
New Assyria.
Good. And so this would have been that Neo-Assyrian empire, all of that between the rivers area, on down around Canaan, on down into Egypt. And these are some of the rulers of the Neo-Assyrian Empire. They were the ones that carried off Israel. Sennacherib invaded Judah, but didn't capture it. But they're the ones that carried the northern tribes off into captivity. And they're the ones that tried to capture Judah during the time of Hezekiah. When their last king died in 626, by the way, Jeremiah fits right before the fall of that. He was called right a year before that. But when he died, then that left the beginning of the Neo-Babylonian Empire, and there won't be a test over these dates.
Okay.
So they don't have to write those down. The Babylonian Empire covered basically the same area, not so far down into Egypt. They defeated Egypt, but they really didn't follow through and dominate Egypt. Remember in the story of Jeremiah how they went as far as Egypt, but they never were interested in really ruling that area. But the Neo-Babylonian Empire was founded by a man named Nabopolassar in 626. He destroyed Nineveh in 612, and Nahum talks about that. And it was his son Nebuchadnezzar that's most interesting to us in the book of Daniel. He was a general at first, and then later became king. And sometimes there's some overlap as far as dates concerned, because he was general, he was king, and so forth. But But Nebuchadnezzar became the king in around 605, 604, somewhere in that area. The other major power, of course, in this whole discussion is Egypt, to the south and the west of the land of Canaan. You remember that Lower Egypt is in the north and Upper Egypt is in the south, because it goes by
The Nile.
elevation. And you know that the Nile flows that way, so it must be higher in the south than it is in the north because it flows that way. So that's Upper and Lower Egypt. Pharaoh Necho went to help the Assyrians against the Babylonians. Didn't do too well. Was defeated at Carchemish. Egypt continued to control Judah through the time of Jehoiakim. And that's about where our story is going to begin. If you back up just a little bit, Hezekiah was one of the few good kings of Judah. He was followed by his son Manasseh, who was really bad. And most of his reign, he was a servant of the Assyrians. He does repent in his captivity. And so there is hope for everybody, because he was really bad. His son Ammon wasn't much better. Just reigned a couple of years, but he was really bad. And then his son Josiah was the other of the really good kings. Hezekiah and Josiah were the good ones. Ezekiel was born during the reign of Josiah. And then Josiah was followed, first of all, by his son Jehoahaz, and then by Jehoiakim. And that's when Daniel is taken into captivity in 605 in that first deportation, and Ezekiel is about age 17. Jehoiakim was replaced by his son Jehoiakim, and that's when Ezekiel was taken into captivity. And then it went back to his uncle, another son of Josiah, Zedekiah. And that's when Jerusalem was finally destroyed, and Jeremiah went to Egypt with the refugees who fled there. So that's a little bit of a background of the time period we're talking about. So I guess we begin in chapter 1.
It's a real good place.
That's the place to start, is chapter 1. The first two verses say, "In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. The Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the vessels of the house of God. And he brought them into the land of Shinar, to the house of his God, and he brought the vessels into the treasury of his God." And two things to notice: the date, it was during the 3rd year of Jehoiakim, which would have been 605, as we said. The important thing to notice, though, is where it says the Lord gave. He didn't do anything. These people didn't do anything because of their own power and ability. God decided to turn Judah over to them. And it says very clearly that the Lord gave them, which, as you might expect, agrees with what we find in 2 Kings chapter 24, first 4 verses, talking also about Jehoiakim. "In his days, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came up, and Jehoiakim became his servant for 3 years. Then he turned and rebelled against him. And the Lord sent against him bands of Chaldeans, bands of Arameans, bands of Moabites, and bands of Ammonites. So he sent them against Judah to destroy it, according to the word of the Lord, which he had spoken through his servants the prophets. Surely at the command of the Lord it came upon Judah, to remove them from his sight, because of the sins of Manasseh, according to all that he had done, and also for the innocent blood which he shed, for he filled Jerusalem with innocent blood, and the Lord would not forgive." Even though Manasseh would repent in captivity, Judah still suffered consequences for what he did. But notice both of these passages point out that God gave Judah over to Babylon, gave Judah over to Nebuchadnezzar. It was God's decision, and God is the one who did it. The next couple of verses, in verses 3 and 4, tells us that the king, Nebuchadnezzar, ordered Ashpenaz, the chief of his officials, to bring in some of the sons of Israel, including some of the royal families and the nobles, youths in whom was no defect, who were good-looking, showing intelligence in every branch of wisdom, endowed with understanding and discerning knowledge, and who had ability for serving in the king's court. And he ordered him to teach them the literature and language of the Chaldeans. And so that's what they were to be taught, basically the culture, the Chaldean culture, the literature and the language of the Chaldeans. Notice that they choose the upper level of the population. These are young men who have special talents. They're good looking. Maybe we could have gotten in on that one. I might not get in on the young men part of it, you might still get in on
Just
that one.
squeak in on
You
that
might
one.
squeak in on the young man part. I could try, but I don't think it'll work. But maybe the good looks overcomes the young part.
Maybe the wisdom overcomes them both.
But it's the upper level, which was the practice when these nations took somebody away. If you look back in that account in 2 Kings 24, it says that then he led away into exile all Jerusalem and all the captains and all the mighty men of valor, 10,000 captives, and all the craftsmen and the smiths. No one remained except the poorest people in the land. And so that was their practice, that they would take away people who would benefit them, and they left others behind to be caretakers. They didn't want the land to be overgrown with weeds and be overrun by wild animals. They left those people to take care of it, but the people who could benefit them, they would take with them, and that included Daniel and some others. The next few verses from verse 5 to 7, the king appointed for them a daily ration from the king's choice food and from the wine which he drank, and appointed that they should be educated 3 years, at the end of which they were to enter the king's personal service. So this is a pretty good training period, 3 years of prep. Now among them from the sons of Judah were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Then the commanders of the officials assigned new names to them, and to Daniel he assigned the name Belteshazzar, to Hananiah Shadrach, to Mishael Meshach, and to Azariah Abednego. So you're going to answer the question for us, why do we remember Daniel and the other three as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Why don't we remember them either all by their Hebrew names or by their Babylonian names?
Because Daniel's the one that wrote the book, so he got to choose.
But why didn't he choose Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah then?
When I meet him one day, I'll ask him.
Asking that. I don't know the answer to that question, except that in the book itself, after the first few accounts, Daniel's always referred to as Daniel, and the other three are always referred to as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So in the majority of the passages, that's how they're referred to, so that's why I don't know. I'll go with that.
I have a note, and I don't know if this is significant or not, but in Ezekiel chapter 17, verse 14, supposedly it explains why the names are changed. It says that the kingdom might be in subjection, not exalting itself, but keeping its covenant that it might continue.
That's what happened to Judah?
Oh,
Is that what you're asking?
No, the guys' names were changed.
To remind them who they were, who their masters were.
Yeah. Is it where Ezekiel 17?
Verse 14. I don't know if that's significant about.
That was the royal family, wasn't it?
So it has nothing to do with this. Okay.
Yeah, I think it had to do with the
kings, because he gave new names to the kings.
And subjecting his royal family, so that it had make an impression on him. Probably is what that was.
Okay, sorry.
No, thank you for pointing that out. In verse 8, it says that Daniel said to the overseer, whom the commander. Oh, I'm reading the next slide. But Daniel made up his mind that he would not defile himself with the king's choice food, or with the wine which he drank. So he sought permission from the commander of the officials that he might not defile himself. Now God granted Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the commander of the officials. And the commander of the officials said to Daniel, I am afraid of my lord the king, who has appointed your food and your drink. For why should he see your faces looking more haggard than the youths who are your age? Then you would make me forfeit my head to the king. But Daniel said to the overseer, whom the commander of the officials had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, please test your servants for 10 days, and let us be given some vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then let our appearance be observed in your presence, and the appearance of the youths who are eating the king's choice food, and deal with your servants according to what you see. So he listened to them in this matter and tested them for 10 days. Daniel and the other three didn't want to defile themselves with the king's food. And, the Hebrews had a fairly straightforward purity code that involved their kosher foods and what they could and could not eat. And there wasn't any way to know what they were going to be getting of these rich foods. They asked that they could not have to eat that food and defile themselves. The natural response of the person in charge of it, I'm afraid of what's going to happen if you guys don't turn out of this the way you should, because I'm the one that's responsible. And if I let you do this and you don't turn out, and then they say, well, why didn't they turn out? They'll say it's because he let them eat something else. And I suspect back then that would have cost his head. Mm-hmm. And so Daniel makes a reasonable request. He said, well, just try it out. Let us check it. And after 10 days, if we're not doing better, then we'll go back and eat the other stuff. And otherwise, check it out. Now, I know that you prefer another translation for that. This is your translation of verses 14 through 16. So if you want to read your translation.
Okay. So he hearkened unto them in this matter and proved them 10 days. And at the end of 10 days, their countenances appeared fairer, and they were fatter in flesh than all the youths that did eat of the king's dainties. So the steward took away their dainties and the wine that they should drink and gave them pulse.
Isn't that awesome?
I love that.
They didn't want the king's dainties.
Yeah. So they ate pulse instead.
And you say you're not much on etymology?
Okay.
How about entomology?
Entomology is the study of bugs.
Okay. Etymology, you're pretty good.
Etymology
Etymology is
the
a study
of words.
And that might not make a difference unless you're a librarian that's afraid of spiders. Because you might be an etymologist who doesn't want to be an entomologist.
Yeah.
But if you are an etymologist, then you will know that what they wanted was salubrious food.
Salubrious is a good thing. I know when it comes to food, you want salubrious.
That word popped into Amy's mind a few days ago. Just popped right in. And I thought it was a sign because it fits right in with Daniel. That's salubrious.
You want to know how I learned the word salubrious?
How'd you learn?
It was in a Calvin and Hobbes comic strip one time, so I looked it up to find out what it meant.
That's one of the best places to learn things like that is in cartoons. Uh-huh. The Italian word for health is salute, from the Latin salus.
Okay.
So now you've had your etymology lesson.
The Latin. Okay.
And so they wanted food that was salubrious, which means favorable or promoting health or well-being, as you know from the Calvin and Hobbes cartoon. They did not want the king's dainties because the dainties were not salubrious enough. Okay? Shall we continue?
I think we better.
Somebody could tell you were on a diet 10 days after you started it.
What's that now?
Don't you wish somebody could tell you on a diet 10 days after you started it?
Yeah.
Took them 10 days to show results.
10 days to show results, and all of a sudden you look younger and smarter and all.
But I've never understood how eating vegetables made them fatter.
I don't know. It may be in a good kind of fat, like they just
maybe healthier.
Yeah, that's what I wondered about the same thing, but
avocados.
Yeah, it was avocados. The avocados would be native to that area.
Wouldn't this be what Daniel was already used to eating?
It would have been ways. I don't know why it would improve his appearance, but it may be that during the exile, going into the exile period, he may not have had access to what he was used to. But that's a good point. It probably wasn't anything other than his regular diet. I don't think he's suggesting anything new.
If they had been serving them meat that he was unsure of its origin or unsure what the meat was, and he wasn't eating that, he may have been losing weight just because he wasn't eating.
That's true too. He may not have been eating their food. Better nourished. We'll go with that one. The salubrious food was more nourishing.
Yes.
And they were better nourished than with the king's dainties.
Okay.
At the end of 10 days, their appearance seemed better, and they were better nourished than all the youths who had been eating the king's dainties. And so the overseer continued to withhold their dainties and the wine they were given to drink, and he had given them pulse.
I like it.
I do not know what pulse is. As for these 4 youths, God gave them knowledge and intelligence in every branch of wisdom, literature and wisdom. Daniel even understood all kinds of visions and dreams. Then at the end of the days, which the king had specified for presenting them, the commander of the officials presented them before Nebuchadnezzar. The king talked with them, and out of them all, not one was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they entered the king's personal service. As for every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king consulted them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and conjurers who were in all his realm. And Daniel continued until the first year of Cyrus the king. And we know that he kept on past that. That's just his stint with the Babylonians
Yeah, that's when
continued on
Babylon-
into the Medes and the Persians. So they tried it. They were better and better nourished. And so God gave them knowledge and intelligence in every branch of literature and wisdom. It already is indicating that Daniel understood all kinds of visions and dreams. I don't know if he had it at this point, but very shortly he's going to exhibit that ability. And they were 10 times better. I don't think that's an absolute number. I think that's just a figurative number, that they were 10 times better than anybody else. They were just way better than anybody else. Which brings us to chapter 2.
Chapter 2. All right. So start out with the first couple verses, get into the story. Now in the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams. His spirit was troubled, and his sleep left him. Then the king gave orders to call in the magicians, the conjurers, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans to tell the king his dreams. So they came in and stood before the king. The king said to them, I had a dream, and my spirit is anxious to understand the dream. So let's see, when did Daniel end up in
605, I think. Is what
chapter 1, verse 1?
that was the third year of
Third year of
Jehoiakim.
King Jehoiakim, which was 605, which was when? When, as
The
far
year
as,
after 606?
yes. But where in Nebuchadnezzar's reign? You put that on there.
Well, it was back a ways. I got to go
Well,
clear back there.
Oh, no, don't go back there. But it was like 604, 605.
604, 605.
Was Nebuchadnezzar's reign.
And that's where that overlapping does,
Yeah.
where he was a general, he became a king. And
So some people have tried to make this a critical point as far as saying, well, already we can't trust Daniel because he gets his dates wrong right off the bat. I mean, if he can't have been in the king's service or in the education program for 3 years, and then in the second year of King Nebuchadnezzar, already achieved this high status because he hadn't finished his introductory. He hadn't even been introduced to the king yet, because that doesn't happen until the end of the 3 years at the end of chapter 1. So,
which is also the third year of Jehoiakim, which wouldn't correspond either if you go
Right.
to.
so there is. It's easy to establish the idea of a co-regency with Nebuchadnezzar and his father. That as his father led those military battles and perhaps was injured or got older and was not able to fully reign in his capacity, that there was a co-regency of Nabopolassar and Nebuchadnezzar, where their reigns overlapped for a period of a couple of years. So if we're talking about the beginning of Nebuchadnezzar's reign in chapter 1, where he is a co-regent with his father, and we're dating time from there, but then sometime in that interim, then he becomes the sole king because his father dies. Then they mark new time as okay, this is his, now he is the sole heir to the throne. So it's not disingenuous or difficult to reconcile those dates and make them work in a way that honors the text without making things up in a historical sense or just trying to gloss over those things.
It was not uncommon back then to have that happen, where you
Right.
had co-regencies.
Right. And we'll see that too, I think, when we get into the book of Judges coming up the next couple of weeks in our reading. If you do some careful math in the Judges and you just take everything as being linear in the way it goes, then there's some dates that are hard to work out. But there must have been some regional judges that kind of had co-judgeships at various times. Somebody in the north and somebody in the south that had were judges at the same time.
Yeah.
So,
Greg?
I quickly get lost on these time sequences, but I wonder, the chapter 1 kind of summarizes it, was all the way to Cyrus. Could they be backing up a bit, because he said, it also says chapter 1 that he was good at first being great and so on. Could it be backing up now to go back to the day of time?
I think that's a possibility, and the only, I guess the only difficulty there is it seems that in chapter 2, Daniel is serving in his position as one of the king's wise men. By that time, he is not still in that education program that he is in chapter 1.
Right. Greg's question was if there could have been some overlap here. Well, it's an overview, that chapter 1's an overview, which it definitely is. I think you're right about when it talks about him having the ability to interpret dreams. I think that's retroactive because he hadn't displayed that yet. So I think you're right. And so I'd wondered about that same thing, but I think Jason is correct that by the time chapter 2 comes around, he is already in the king's service. But it's possible. But it's not contradictory to follow the text as being literally true.
And the point is, there are ways to reconcile the dates given at the beginning in chapter 1 and chapter 2 without saying that there's a mistake in the text, or without being, like I say, without making things up in a historical sense either.
And we'll later on we'll run into when we get to Belshazzar and the handwriting on the wall that he offered to make Daniel number 3 in the kingdom. Well, that's because he was actually number 2. His father was the king, but he was in charge of the city of Babylon, and so he had a position, and so it makes him the king, but he was really number 2, and he could only offer Daniel number 3. That's what you're talking about, a co-regency type thing,
Right.
which was not uncommon.
Right. So as we're introduced here, the king has a dream, and from the way the Bible talks about people who have dreams that have a visionary context to them, you have to wonder what those dreams were like, because I think this is not a dream like you and I have, where we wake up and and wow, that was weird, and we wonder, was there any meaning there, and we roll over, go back to sleep, and forget about it in the morning. I think when these type of dreams happen, it's known to the person that has the dream, this was special. Something is being revealed here that is different than just your everyday ordinary dream. It's not your subconscious playing tricks on you. It's a vision, and there's some quality to it, or some characteristic to it that I don't think we can relate to. So the king awakens from this dream knowing that he's got to get to the bottom of this. So he calls the people that he thinks can help them, and there are 4 classes of people here: magicians, conjurers, sorcerers, and Chaldeans. And they all kind of have their, if you want to talk about the etymology of each word, jump in.
No, thank you. But they're soothsayers, Chaldeans probably are soothsayers.
Right, and so they are different classifications of people. They had their own specialty, whether some were astrologers and they looked to the stars, some were, maybe the ones that had some kind of a potion component to what they did, and they had herbs or whatever. Others may have had the casting of lots and things like that. And so there were different classifications of these people that he was leaving no stone unturned. He was looking for every source of guidance he could find.
The magicians were soothsayer priests. The conjurers were master astrologers and so forth.
Okay.
So you're right. They used different processes to get to their conclusions.
Verses 4 to 13 says, "Then the Chaldeans spoke to the king in Aramaic." Okay.
Time out.
Oh, etymology.
No.
Okay. No?
No.
Okay. You going to deal with the Aramaic thing?
You're going to tell me about that.
Okay, so Daniel is unique among Bible books in that the Old Testament is written primarily in Hebrew, but there are portions of Daniel that are written in Aramaic. And Aramaic and Hebrew were related languages. They were of the same classification of language, but Hebrew would have been for the Israelites, and then Aramaic was more of a common language for the rest of the tribes around them. And so Aramaic is what everybody could have spoken, and Hebrew would have been more just localized for the Israelites. But they are to you and I, they look the same. I mean, if we look at the written words and on the page, it's going to look the same to us.
They both look like Greek. No,
I
they
can
don't
look.
look
I
like
know
Greek.
what Greek
I can
looks
figure
like.
out the Greek.
Yeah.
But through the end of chapter 7, now it's all in Aramaic.
Yeah.
It picks up here, goes to. So if someone says what language is the Old Testament written in, and you say Hebrew, you're not quite correct.
97% right.
99.9% correct. But this portion is written in Aramaic. Okay, sorry.
That's okay. O king, live forever. And I can't speak Aramaic, so I'm just going to read it in English. O king, live forever. Tell the dream to your servants, and we will declare the interpretation. The king replied to the Chaldeans, "The command from me is firm. If you do not make known to me the dream and its interpretation, you will be torn limb from limb, and your houses will be made a rubbish heap. But if you declare the dream and its interpretation, you will receive from me gifts and a reward and great honor. Therefore declare to me the dream and its interpretation." They answered a second time and said, "Let the king tell the dream to his servants, and we will declare the interpretation." The king replied, "I know for certain that you are bargaining for time, inasmuch as you have seen that the command from me is firm. that if you do not make the dream known to me, there is only one decree for you. For you have agreed together to speak lying and corrupt words before me until the situation is changed. Therefore, tell me the dream, that I may know that you can declare to me its interpretation. The Chaldeans answered the king and said, There is not a man on earth who could declare the matter for the king, inasmuch as no great king or ruler has ever asked anything like this of any magician, conjurer, or Chaldean. Moreover, the thing which the king demands is difficult, and there is no one else who could declare it to the king except God's, whose dwelling place is not with mortal flesh. Because of this, the king became indignant and very furious and gave orders to destroy all the wise men of Babylon. So the decree went forth that the wise men should be slain, and they looked for Daniel and his friends to kill them. The king's unreasonable request. And it's pointed out to the king that his request is unreasonable. Unless you tell me the dream, I'm not going to believe your interpretation of the dream. So I'm not going to tell you the dream so that you can tell me what it means. You have to tell me the dream and then tell me what it means so that I can know that your interpretation is correct. And they tried to prod him on and say, oh, that's not the way this works, kings. No king has ever asked this before.
And you're right, it is an unreasonable request. However, there's a little bit of wisdom there, because if you will tell me your dream, I will tell you what it means. And there's no way to tell whether I'm right or wrong. But it doesn't require any ability to interpret your dream.
Right.
Unless, in Daniel's case, it came true in some instances, then
Right.
that's easy to figure out.
And there's some level of wisdom to what the conjurers and soothsayers speak, even though I think maybe they don't realize they're wise, but they make the case that nobody could do this except, they say, the gods. And they're exactly right. I mean, only God can do what has been asked.
Yeah.
And they are, in essence, affirming what Daniel does before Daniel ever even does it.
And that's one of the important elements of that. I think they've been operating on deception all along.
Right.
But I think they do have some insight that you're pointing out that is proven by Daniel.
Yeah.
They don't realize it at the time, but they're actually stating the fact that there's only one God who can do this. And so,
and the cost of failure here is extreme. It's not you'll be demoted. It's not you're going to be fired. It's not I'm going to send you to Siberia or whatever the outer reaches of the kingdom were. And it's not even I'm going to chop off your head. I mean, that'd be bad enough, but I'm going to tear you limb from limb. And then your families and everything you own will be turned into a rubbish heap. So, this is, it's do or die. It's put your money where your mouth is kind of time for these conjurers. And you have to wonder here, Nebuchadnezzar in the second year of his reign seems to have a pretty intense distrust for these conjurers and magicians right off the bat, which makes you wonder what he's witnessed and how they've maybe they have led Nebuchadnezzar's father down some dark paths before, or he's witnessed them, ply his own father for power or whatever. And so he begins with a very prominent distrust for these wise men at the very beginning of his reign. They object, but it doesn't matter. The king's word is sovereign in this context, and I think we see some indications of that from the way that Daniel's overseer treats him in the first chapter. He says, "I'm afraid." If the king has said, "Feed these men from my table with my food," and that man doesn't do it, there's no bargaining for for release from the penalty for that. It means his life. You do what the king says without question, without hesitation, or you die. And that's what Nebuchadnezzar makes clear here. And he sends out immediately, okay, kill them all. In fact, kill the ones who aren't even here to listen. I mean, Daniel and his three friends aren't even there. And yet we're going to go find them and kill them too, because they're part of this group. So verses 14 to 18, pick up the story there. It says, Then Daniel replied with discretion and discernment to Arioch, the captain of the king's bodyguard, who had gone forth to slay the wise men of Babylon. He said to Arioch, the king's commander, For what reason is the decree from the king so urgent? Then Arioch informed Daniel about the matter. So Daniel went in and requested of the king that he would give him time in order that he might declare the interpretation to the king. Then Daniel went to his house and informed his friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, about the matter, so that they might request compassion from the God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that Daniel and his friends would not be destroyed with the rest of the wise men in Babylon. So Daniel's life is numbered with those who have displeased the king. And at the beginning, we talked about who these four classifications of people were, the wise men and conjurers and soothsayers and whatever the words were, Chaldeans, but there's a kind of a mystic component to the way that these men are viewed in the role that they fulfill for the king. And the king doesn't care, doesn't seem to care, if that information that they deliver comes from astrology or comes from their priests or comes from their divining or the magicry or whatever you call it. He doesn't care the source of that. He just wants the best information he can get. And so Daniel and his three friends, though they have no association in reality with the methods that these other men are using to get their wisdom and their information, they're all lumped in together. But here is the case, or here is the situation that is going to separate Daniel and his friends from these other classifications of people. Daniel and his three friends are not going to be viewed in the same way as those conjurers after this point. And so it's going to be, this is happening in part to separate Daniel and his friends from what they've been associated with. So Daniel has access to the king, which I thought was an interesting part of the story. It's not just that Daniel petitions Arioch himself, but there is some measure to which it seemed the text seems to indicate that Daniel had access to Nebuchadnezzar himself, where he doesn't just get a reprieve on his death from Arioch for a 24-hour period or whatever it is, but the king himself says, okay, stay that order for an amount of time so that Daniel can fulfill my request. Which again indicates to me a level of respect that the king already has for Daniel, because it doesn't seem that the other magicians and conjurers are getting that deference from the king. The bodyguard's been sent to kill them, and here Daniel gets a dispensation to have some time to make progress on the king's request. So Daniel enlists the help of his three friends. He goes straight to them and tells them of the situation. They're in the same boat as Daniel is. If this doesn't work out well, they're all going to die. And so they have a right to know what's going on, but Daniel also wants to enlist them in helping to appeal to God for deliverance out of the situation. Verses 19 to 24. Then the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a night vision. Then Daniel blessed the God of heaven. Daniel said, "Let the name of God be blessed forever and ever, for wisdom and power belong to him. It is he who changes the times and the epochs. He removes kings and establishes kings. He gives wisdom to wise men and knowledge to men of understanding. It is he who reveals the profound and hidden things. He knows what is in the darkness, and the light dwells with him. To you, O God of my fathers, I give thanks and praise, for you have given me wisdom and power. Even now you have made known to me what we requested of you, for you have made known to us the king's matter." Therefore Daniel went in to Arioch, whom the king had appointed to destroy the wise men of Babylon. He went in and spoke to him as follows: "Do not destroy the wise men of Babylon. Take me into the king's presence, and I will declare the interpretation to the king." So the mystery is revealed to Daniel in a night vision. And again, there's some quality or some aspect or characteristic of what happens within this vision that Daniel has, that he knows this is the answer. He knows there's a clarity to it. There's an understanding that goes along with it, that is not just Daniel had his own dream, fell asleep out of exhaustion and had a dream, and oh, it must have come to me. He understands that there's something special about this vision that he's had. And the praise that Daniel offers to God is sincere, and it's reactionary. I mean, he reacts to the vision that he's seen. So it oftentimes in a moment of crisis or in a moment of stress, the way that somebody reacts in that moment kind of reveals something about their character. And here we see Daniel, his first response in this moment is to praise God for what has taken place. And so we see that reveals something to us about Daniel's character.
That's a good point. That's something that he continues through the whole book, especially later on in the book where he sees all these visions. You notice how he reacts to all these different visions that he sees through so that's a good point, that was his character to do that.
And another thing that reveals to us about his character in this is that after he's done praising God, the first communication he has is with Arioch and says, "Don't kill the wise men." Well, for a man who is worldly minded, it might be an occasion to say, let him go ahead and kill all those wise men and get rid of all of them, and then I'll reveal that, oh, just now, I've gotten the message or whatever, and now any competition from those wise men or from those others is gone because they've been eliminated, and now I can establish myself as having the king's ear or whatever.
And they were charlatans anyway, and
Right.
so get them out of the way.
Yeah, and so Daniel shows compassion and mercy upon the ones that are being murdered, and he has the opportunity to save them, and he does. Verses 25 to 30 says, Then Arioch hurriedly brought Daniel into the king's presence and spoke to him as follows, I have found a man among the exiles from Judah who can make the interpretation known to the king. The king said to Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, Are you able to make known to me the dream which I have seen and its interpretation? Daniel answered before the king and said, As for the mystery about which the king has inquired, neither wise men, conjurers, magicians, nor diviners are able to declare it to the king. However, there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries, and he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will take place in the latter days. This was your dream and the visions in your mind while on your bed. As for you, O king, while on your bed, your thoughts turn to what would take place in the future, and he who reveals mysteries has made known to you what will take place. But as for me, this mystery has not been revealed to me for any wisdom residing in me more than in any other living man, but for the purpose of making the interpretation known to the king, and that you may understand the thoughts of your mind.
That sounds exactly like what the other guys said.
Uh-huh.
Basically, they said the same thing.
Yeah.
We can't do it. Only
Yeah.
God can do it.
And Daniel he's taken in before the king. King asks him point blank, there's no beating around the bush, there's no pleasantries exchanged. Can you tell me the dream? And Daniel says, no, I can't tell you the dream. It does not reside within man to have the ability or the power to tell you what you dream. But there is a God in heaven. And the God in heaven is able to make known to men the things that are going to take place in the future. And the way that Daniel words things, he even doesn't even take credit for being the vehicle through which God makes known the revelation. He basically says, King, God has shown you the future. You're the one that God is showing the future to. He's just enabling me to tell you what the dream means. You're the special one here. You're the one that's had the dream that reveals the future. And so even in his interpretation and revealing what God has given to him, still does not seek any credit or any recompense for himself. He's putting it all upon God, choosing the king to reveal the future to. So verses 31 to 35 give us the dream. It says, You, O king, were looking, and behold, there was a single great statue. The statue, which was large and of extraordinary splendor, was standing in front of you, and its appearance was awesome. The head of that statue was made of fine gold, its breast and its arms of silver, its belly and its thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. You continued looking until the stone was cut out without hands, and it struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay and crushed them. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were crushed all at the same time and became like chaff from the summer threshing floors. And the wind carried them away so that not a trace of them was found. But the stone that struck the statue became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. So the details of the dream are revealed. The statue with a head of gold, and a breast and arms of silver, belly and thighs of bronze, legs of iron, feet of iron mixed with clay, and then a stone cut without hands is what descends and crushes the statue. And this is exactly what it looked like.
That's exactly it.
So
Is that you, or is that Nebuchadnezzar?
I did not have that dream, so that's not me.
Okay.
Yeah, well, some have seen a likeness.
You
That's
look-
all I'm going to say.
You look a lot like Nebuchadnezzar to me.
Yeah. Thank you. Not later in the book, I hope.
No.
Okay.
Early in the book,
All right.
when he was younger.
No,
Okay.
not when he had claws and hair.
No,
like
not the-
feathers
not
and-
the-
Okay.
I have a
All right.
picture of that too.
Oh, great. Can't wait for that one. All right. So the dream is revealed, and you can understand. I mean, that's, well, of course, the dream makes sense. Once you're told the dream, well, yeah, I could have figured that out, right? I could have, if I was one of those wise men, I could have guessed what the king dreamed.
Yeah, probably not.
Probably not.
No, probably not.
not.
I could have made up something.
I could have made up something, but it would have not been close. All right, so verses 36 to 43, we get into the meaning of the dream that has been revealed to Daniel. So the dream itself was revealed to King Nebuchadnezzar, and then the meaning of the dream, of course, itself too, was revealed to Daniel, but the meaning of the dream was revealed to Nebuchadnezzar through Daniel. It says, this was the dream. Now we will tell its interpretation before the king. You, O king, are the King of kings, to whom the God of heaven has given the kingdom, the power, the strength, the glory, and wherever the sons of men dwell, or the beasts of the field, or the birds of the sky, he has given them into your hand and caused you to rule over them all. You are the head of gold. After you there will arise another kingdom, inferior to you, and then a third kingdom of bronze, which will rule over all the earth. Then there will be a fourth kingdom as strong as iron, inasmuch as iron crushes and shatters all things. So like iron that breaks into pieces, it will crush and break all these in pieces. In that you saw the feet and toes partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, it will be a divided kingdom. But it will have in it the toughness of iron, inasmuch as you saw the iron mixed with common clay. As the toes of the feet were partly of iron and partly of pottery, so some of the kingdom will be strong and part of it will be brittle. And in that you saw the iron mixed with common clay, they will combine with one another in the seed of men, but they will not adhere to one another, even as iron does not combine with pottery. So the statue represents earthly kingdoms yet to come. Babylon was the kingdom that was in power at that time under the rule of Nebuchadnezzar, and he was that head of gold that is the current kingdom. The next kingdom that would come after him was a Medo-Persian Empire. After that would be the empire of the Greeks that was led by Alexander the Great. After his death, his kingdom was divided into four lesser kingdoms, and then after a time from that rose the Roman Empire. And the Roman Empire eventually was divided and represented by that the clay and the iron mixed together. And so those four kingdoms are going back centuries, going back thousands of years, are the kingdoms that have been identified as biblical interpretation. Daniel is one of those books where if you begin researching a lot of the things that are written in Daniel, there's just a lot of junk out there.
Oh yeah, people with their theories about.
There's really, really bad scholarship on Daniel. There's really, really bad interpretation of the things that these mean, and people try to adjust which kingdoms are intended to be understood by the four things. They get into even trying to identify the toes of the statue as being 10 different smaller kingdoms that follow in the future, and there's lots of just really, really bad information out there on Daniel. So obviously, only the stuff that we give you is the good stuff. But we just have to be careful. There's a lot of good information, got a lot of good writing, good commentaries and those kind of things. But these are the kingdoms that are represented, and to read too much into what Daniel prophesies about is to do a disservice to the text. To try to limit what Daniel says as not meaning the things that it does mean would be a disservice to the text. We can only take the text as far as it can go, and some people try to take it way further than it should be taken.
And Jim McGuigan is especially cognizant of that, and a lot of his commentary deals with some of that abuse.
Yeah.
The Babylonian Empire, of course, is going to be important. The Persian Empire is going to be important in Daniel, but it's also going to be important in Esther and then in their return, and so those are going to be important while we're still in the Bible, Old Testament Bible period. And we will get, there are future chapters of Daniel that will elaborate more fully upon some of the things that we can associate with. We can identify these kingdoms much better through some future things that Daniel prophesies about, and we can make those things align with those four kingdoms fully. Not just taking this one dream and saying, well, because for centuries people have identified these four kingdoms, that's the last thing to be said about it. Well, there's going to be more said about it even in the book of Daniel. So we'll see more later. Daniel 2, verses 44 and 45, it says, "In the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which will never be destroyed, and that kingdom will not be left for another people. It will crush and it will put an end to all these kingdoms, but it will itself endure forever. Inasmuch as you saw that a stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it crushed the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great God has made known to the king what will take place in the future. So the dream is true, and its interpretation is trustworthy. The stone that destroys the statue is special. It's not just some boulder that becomes dislodged from a mountain and rolls down a hill and haphazardly destroys the city below. It has been cast down. It has targeted the kingdoms that are represented by the statue. And the fact that it is a stone that's been cut without the aid of human hands
tells us where it comes from. If it's been cut without human hands, there's only one source of it, and that's a divine source. And so there is a divine kingdom that is coming that will supersede all of these other kingdoms. As great as all of these four kingdoms were in their own ways, and each of them had some sort of might or some sort of characteristic that elevated it over the other kingdoms, there is a kingdom coming which will outshine them all. And we see that kingdom described in Matthew chapter 16. It says, "Now when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, he began asking his disciples, saying, 'Who do people say that the Son of Man is?' And they said, 'Some say John the Baptist, others Elijah, but still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets.' And he said to them, 'But who do you say that I am?' Simon Peter answered and said, 'Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God.' Jesus answered and said to him, 'Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, because flesh and blood did not reveal this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. Also I say to you that you are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades shall not overpower it.'" So there is a kingdom coming that Jesus talks about here with Peter that says is imminent. It's here. It's on the horizon. It's coming, and there will be nothing that can overpower it. There is no physical kingdom. Certainly, if the kingdom of death, of Hades, cannot overpower it, then there will be no physical kingdom that can overpower it either. And so the kingdom that Jesus foretells is the church, and that church has been established, and that is the kingdom that God, that in the dream is cast down as that stone that destroys the earthly kingdoms, that supersedes those earthly kingdoms. It says, "Then King Nebuchadnezzar fell on his face and did homage to Daniel and gave orders to present him an offering and fragrant incense. The king answered Daniel and said, 'Surely your God is a God of gods and the Lord of kings and a revealer of mysteries, since you have been able to reveal this mystery.' Then the king promoted Daniel and gave him many great gifts and made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon and chief prefect over all the wise men of Babylon. And Daniel made a request of the king, and he appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the administration of the province of Babylon while Daniel was at the king's court." So Nebuchadnezzar's reaction is sincere. It is, it's not contrived. I think it's very sincere in what Nebuchadnezzar does. He recognizes that Daniel is special, but he recognizes also the source from which Daniel is special. He's not. He takes Daniel at his word about God revealing the dream to him. Daniel. How would any of those other wise men reacted had they been able to deliver the information to the king? Here. Let me tell you what this means, king. But Daniel never takes that for himself. He defers all of the time to God as being the source of that information. And so Nebuchadnezzar honors what Daniel has said, that it is Daniel's God that has given him that information. Daniel is given authority. He's given riches. He's given power. He's given everything that he didn't seek. He didn't ask for any of that. And yet it is awarded to him. And then Daniel remembers his three friends and has them appointed along with him in a position of authority. Remember where Daniel went when the crisis presented itself. The first place he went was to his friends and asked their help in seeking God's wisdom, seeking God's guidance. And so now that Daniel has been elevated to a position of authority, where does he go? He goes to his friends who can, again, on God's petition, God on his behalf for wisdom and understanding as he fulfills the duties that have been placed before him.
And here you notice that their names switched to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And this is where it changed, I think, in the rest of the book. The few times that we see them after this, they use those names. And so from here on out, it's Daniel and then those three names. Do you have any questions for them?
Always.
What did they request? What was their concession?
Pulse.
Pulse. They wanted pulse. So they did not want the dainties. They wanted pulse. And what was the result of their request?
Health. What was that phrase? They were not fatter. They were more nourished.
Better nourished.
Better nourished. That was it.
They were better nourished.
No wonder.
What was the king's dream?
A giant statue.
What kind of statue?
Head of gold, arms and breast of silver, legs and waist of thighs of bronze, and legs of iron and feet of iron and clay.
Oh, that's close enough. And what did that represent?
Coming kingdoms.
4 kingdoms. I just, I don't know if it gets better and better, but it sure is great.
It's hard to think that it can get any better,
Yeah.
but it keeps doing it.
But it's so, be sure and come back same time next week. Thank you very much.